I am proud and happy to say is on the forefront of doing customer experience in government in partnership with an agency that will remain unnamed that I happen to work at. I'm here in my personal capacity today, not as a representative of my agency, and this is, again, not about me today. What I do want to say is that I've been not actively engaged with ACT-IAC throughout my career. And it was only last year that Martha and Charlotte pulled me into this community of interest. And it didn't take much effort because I think customer experience to me is something that's been really missing from the government conversation for a long time. So when this community of practice started, actually when I was working with Martha back at unnamed agency that she named earlier, she got me energized, excited, infected about the prospects of customer experience and kind of are becoming maybe a new North Star for how we measure our performance and how we drive forward within government. It is no secret that government has, over the years, lost the trust of the American people, and that experience with the government is at the bottom or near the bottom as compared to all other industries. So we need to do something about that if government's going to remain relevant. I would say that I'm a big proponent of bringing in best practices in general in government, so I'm excited about this event in particular. I'm gauging that all the rest of you, the familiar faces and others here, feel the same way. It's about learning. Today's about learning, so I want to minimize the amount I talk. I want this to be a conversation among the panelists who, by the way, I don't think anyone here has met one another yet, except maybe on some phone calls. So what I want to do is fade into the background, throw a couple questions in here once in a while, and let the panel kind of share their experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think it's important to share the negatives and the positives, because that's really how we learn. So our panel today is an eclectic group, to say the least. We've got David Marin from VA, who has really worked on some specific projects on bringing customer discipline into the government. Lynn, Pina is with industry. She's in the healthcare industry as well, so this is an all healthcare panel. Lynn is working with a company, GeoBlue, and she is working on how to bring more of a customer focus into their organization. And Will Brady from HHS is looking at things from more of a policy perspective, working in one of the largest enterprises in the world, HHS. How do we bring that discipline in where maybe historically it hasn't been a focus of that agency in the past? So I'm hoping the blend of experiences here makes this a particularly interesting panel, and that's why one of the reasons I was excited to help put it together. So I'm going to give each of the panelists a few minutes to just talk about who they are, where they come from, what has motivated them to get into the customer space, maybe share a success or a failure or two. So I'm going to not ask any questions until they've all gone through. We'll start with Lynn, our guest from industry. And then I'll seed some questions, and then maybe at the end, the last 10 minutes or so, open it up to some audience questions. Does that make sense? Sound fair? Okay, great. Well, Lynn, thank you so much for coming, and then we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? First of all, thank you guys for having me here. It's been really interesting to hear from some of the other panelists earlier. So my name is Lynn Pina. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at GeoBlue, and let me tell you a little bit about what we do. So we're in the business of providing health insurance for people who live, work, travel, or study abroad. So we have a very interesting mission as an organization because we're helping people in some of the most difficult situations they might be in terms of trying to access healthcare outside of where they're normally used to accessing healthcare. So if you can picture, our average customer is someone who's either an expatriate, so someone who's been asked to take an assignment abroad and move with their entire family to another country to work for their company. Or we also serve students on study abroad programs or individuals on individual expats, or people also on study abroad programs or on leisure travel. And one of the things that's really great about what we do is we get to help people every day. But we just like a lot of other people talked about, we help people in lots of different segments. And so customer empathy is a really important part of trying to figure out how we can best serve those customers. Myself in the marketing role, I'm responsible for marketing, of course, but also customer experience. Just in terms of sort of how I got into customer experience, I think, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm in marketing, and to be successful in marketing, you have to put yourself in the customer's shoes. It's just a key part of the marketing discipline, is understanding what the customer is about from a demographic standpoint, what their mindset is, what their pain points are. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey at GeoBlue. Everybody's been talking about how complex it is, your organizations. I'd love to hear all the conversation about culture, because that's something I'm super passionate about. I think everything starts with the culture of an organization. And when I think about the customer experience journey at GeoBlue, it's really been about culture. I'm relatively new to the organization. This August will be 3 years. And when I came on board, first of all, of course, I was attracted to the mission of the organization in terms of helping people when they're abroad access healthcare. But one of the things for me that was really fundamental was sort of, what's the purpose of the organization? Why do we come to work every day? And one of the first things I did when I came to the organization was to kind of redefine our company purpose. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Simon Sinek and the sort of the why. And I think for me, that was like the big thing. I went around the organization and tried to understand sort of, why are we all here today? And I think people sort of intrinsically knew why they were coming to work every day, but we weren't able to crystallize that into a short, succinct sentence that everybody could repeat. And I think when we talk about culture, it's that true north of sort of why you're coming to work every day. I think it applies as well to the government area, because I think, of course, in business, we're here to generate profit, but that doesn't drive people. People want to feel connected to something. They want to know they have a purpose. They want to know how do they impact the organization. And I think that's something that is sort of intrinsic to government as well. You guys were all in charge of agencies that have a mission, and I think that's one way to kind of drive the organization around customer experience. So that's one of the first things that when I came on board was to say, what is our company purpose, and try to help define that. And we kind of, the important part of that also was looking at what the assets of the organization were. We're a customer service oriented organization already. We're serving people. But there's a difference between customer service and customer experience, because of what ends up happening often when you're in an organization. Obviously we have customer service area, we have call centers, and I think when you have an organization like that, it's really easy if you don't work in that department to think you have nothing to do with customer service. And so that's another thing to me about why the purpose of the organization is so important, because we're all part of the purpose. And therefore, even if I work in IT, or I work in finance, or I work in whatever area of the organization, I have some role to play in customer experience. So for me, I think one of the things I'm very passionate about is sort of this idea of what's the organization's purpose, and then how do you align people around that. And I think that's a great framework to also sort of build customer experience around. So for our company, after some work with some external consultants, doing a lot of interviews with employees, doing a lot of interviews with our clients and customers, because it's one thing for us to talk about who we think we are, but who are we really to the people that we serve? And some of the things that came out was just the sort of the overall passion of our organization. People really care about the fact that, I'm helping somebody who's trying to, if you picture yourself, you're an American, all of a sudden you're sent to Singapore or Hong Kong or Germany, and you're there with your family, you've uprooted their entire life for your company. One way for you to be successful in that organization that you're at, and for you to be successful in your role, is you don't want to have to worry about your health care. But you're accessing health care maybe in a company that you're not familiar, or sorry, a country where you're not familiar with the system. You don't know the language. They have different standards of care. And so for us, it's really important to make sure that we understand sort of what that customer need is, and then how we all play a role in that. One other thing to talk about in terms of our journey as an organization, and I was mentioning this to Dominic when we were talking on the phone. When I first came on board and we were talking about putting in place a customer experience program, what I kept hearing from everybody was, well, we don't have a customer service problem. We're not getting complaints, so what do we need this for? And I think it kind of goes back to this idea of well, if we don't have complaints, and everybody kept saying, well, it's not like we're, the cable company, and everybody hates the cable company. Customers are saying we're doing great, we're not losing business, what do we need customer experience for? And for me, it was also, again, going back to sort of the company purpose. For us, it's about, we came up with the idea that for us, our whole job is to simplify the healthcare experience for our members when they're abroad. because we want to make things easier for them. And the why of that is so that they can go about doing their job, so that they can be secure in their healthcare, so that they can focus on their studies or focus on their work and not have to worry about their healthcare. But it was definitely a challenge in our organization to get people around this idea of why do we need customer experience when we're not getting complaints. And so to address that also, for me, it was this idea of sort of how do we compete as an organization? I think typically in a lot of businesses, it's about competing on the products. And in being in a for-profit business, it's definitely, especially on the sales side here, we gotta create more products. We gotta create more products. Well, at the end of the day, what is a product? It's just an amalgamation of experiences, and we need to focus on what the experience is. And when we can provide differentiated experience, then we have a really big chance of competing against some of the other players in our marketplace. So those, for us, those were sort of two challenges: is sort of putting in place the purpose, the why we're here every day, getting people aligned around that. And then how do we get people focused around this idea of customer experience versus customer service when you don't have in everybody's mind a customer service problem? Those were some of the challenges that we've been dealing with since we've been putting our program in place. It's been in place about a year and a half now. So we've got, we've come a long way, but we definitely have a ways to go in terms of our journey. And look forward to telling you guys more about that.
Thanks, Lynn. I hear a lot of words like experience and passion and emotion. I want to follow through on that thread after this. So I want to touch on that point a little later in the talk. Will, from HHS, can you tell us a little bit about what your role is there?
Yeah, oh, excuse me. I think you all can hear. Yeah, so I'm, as you heard, Will Brady. I'm an Associate Deputy Secretary at HHS, and I've heard that doesn't really explain what I do, and so I'll try to, pardon? It said something, I'm not sure, but so, as Associate Deputy Secretary, I sit in the immediate office of the Secretary, and I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations and management of our offices of administration, finance, national security, and our technology office operationally. And then from a policy and strategy standpoint, I develop policy and strategy within the divisions of CMS, FDA, and other initiatives related to deregulation and innovation. And so a little bit about kind of my role. Previously I was at a large health insurer, and before that I had a software company. And so it's been an interesting journey to get here, but HHS is a very fulfilling place to work with very many opportunities and challenges that always make it interesting. But so some of the ways that we've kept customer experience and customer service at front of mind is kind of twofold. The first is, as policymakers, we have heard that there is some frustration in the healthcare industry as far as consumers' experiences, providers' experiences, payers. And in all the policy that we develop and try to push, that's at the front of mind in a couple ways. In one particular example, we've got a regulatory effort to where it's called the regulatory sprint to coordinated care. And ultimately, it's focused on the patient experience and having coordinated care. We've heard time and again that some of the regulations and activities that HHS and government do are designed in a way that haven't evolved with the healthcare industry. And so this sprint from a policy and regulatory standpoint is looking to reform some of those elements to allow entities within the healthcare sector to better coordinate, to ultimately provide that better customer experience. And so that's one of the ways that HHS, I'd say, not directly providing the customer experience to an individual in the healthcare industry, but allowing those who do to have the flexibility so that they can provide a better customer experience. So an example is that sharing data and having information is critically important to providing a good healthcare experience. There are barriers to that, and not just the information, but how people can work together. And so that's an example of how we've, from a policy standpoint, when we're developing that, we keep it in front of mind to ask the questions and hear from people, what are your direct customers' frustrations, and how can we all work together to allow industry to create a better customer experience directly to those in the healthcare industry. So that's kind of one lens, and the policy, from the policy kind of apparatus. The other is as a government organization providing services and delivering. And that's one where I'd say it's a little, in some ways there's more clear customer service and provider relationships. And in some ways it's incredibly nuanced. As an example, excuse me, CMS is the distributor of Medicare, has a pretty clear customer relationship with Medicare beneficiaries in a lot of ways, to where they're paying for claims, they're providing their coverage, and that's probably one of the more clear customer provider relationships. But if you look at an organization like the Office of the National Coordinator, which develops standards for IT, the customer is, once again, industry. It's the Hill, it's people in the executive office of the president, where they have so many customers and it's so nuanced that it's a more challenging environment to understand what customer experience that you're delivering and who you're serving. And I think those are, that's kind of one of the ways as an organization, HHS, we are in the very beginning stages of assessing how each operating division and staff division within HHS is viewing customer service and the customer experience that they're providing. In our initial assessments, the first thing that was clear is there's a little bit of a culture change that needs to happen when you survey kind of your organizations in a decent number and say, well, I don't have customers. You right away know, okay, we've got the first task. I think, although that response came, I think it was expected, to where it is kind of new to think about it in the government environment, to where you're not selling a product where we think of people as customers. But so that was kind of one of the first things of, all right, we need to reframe some of our mindset and make this a point of delivery, a point of operational excellence or delivery, is to focus on this customer experience. And so we did that, and with that we've kind of identified some of the first things that we think we need to do. And with HHS being such a diverse organization, we have, you know, the Indian Health Services, which is a 200 facility hospital system, all the way to the FDA, which is, you know, regulates what can be used in industry, two entirely different department or agencies serving two different missions in two different ways. And so that makes it a very complex and very challenging project to say, hey, what's your customer service approach? And either, if they have one, it's great. In some ways there are a lot of organizations that do, but in others they say, well, what do you mean? And so one of the things that we are working through now, like I said, is identifying what's the customer experience across HHS. But then as leadership, we have to provide a framework of what that is to people who haven't, you know, historically thought in that manner. And so we're in the process of thinking through what is a scalable framework across the department that allows each agency to develop a customer experience element within how they operate. And so there's some things that I think are front of mind, of just creating a metric for gathering customer feedback and identifying your customers are kind of the first two steps. But so that's some of the ways that we're doing this on the policy side, but also operationally, that we're working through of how do you create a customer experience framework from a leadership level that you can push down across a very diverse organization, and allow them to find value in this, and to better make it, to inform better decision making, and ultimately serve the American people better. So there's hopefully that gives a little bit more light on some of the efforts we're underway.
Great, thanks, Will. I love that concept of a framework. I don't know how many people are familiar with the customer experience playbook that has been put out by the CX community of interest, community of practice. Check it out, because I think some of the building blocks are in there. David.
Hello.
Let's hear about your experiences at VA.
Sure. All right. Good morning. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I first want to say thank you so much to Charlotte for inviting me. Really appreciate it. And I'm happy to share my personal experiences. Everything I'm discussing here today is not directed to the VA, but just my own experiences. Though I want to actually just start off by saying, I'm proud to be at the VA, and I'm very happy to kind of share that the things that have been challenges or issues or things that we'll talk about, I can frame it and say that on the VA side of things, we've kind of turned the corner and gone in the right direction, and we're not running, we're sprinting in the right direction. And I want to give a shout out to the VEO for really being a champion for that in our agency. They've done spectacular work, and I'm very happy about where everything's going. So our trust scores are going up with veterans, and this is kind of one of these things that people are talking about is we're talking about veteran. I'm kind of new to the customer experience space, but I'm kind of looking at it as a relationship building space. And when you frame it in this relationship, you're talking about trust. You're building trust. You want satisfaction, and it's been really kind of thrilling to kind of hear the conversation and understand kind of everyone's perspectives. It kind of makes total sense why I'm here sharing. And I'll talk about kind of how I got into this space a little bit. I'll give some examples of projects I've worked on, and then just my thoughts around how there's something actually very thrilling about customer experience because it creates a common ground that everyone can contribute towards, right? Everyone, no matter who you are in the agency, you have to understand how it's kind of like the front-facing part of how a person interacts with your agency, your company. Everyone has to understand that as a part of their role. How are they contributing? And there is meaning in that, and that's critically important in order to have satisfaction in your job. And then that resonates. That shares that relationship that a person has with the person that they interact with. There is a kind of a gestalt that happens where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. The benefit of that, the relationship building of that, the trust, it magnifies, and the more consistent and regular it is, it kind of changes the whole color and complexion of your ability to help each other. So I work with data. I work with the electronic medical record data quite a bit. I do research, and I facilitate a lot of the research at my medical center here in DC. And so I get to see a lot of the different issues that veterans face and support the efforts that improve the quality of care that we provide through research. I got into this space in a very kind of interesting way. I analyzed data on a study that was looking at traumatic brain injury for our veterans and their reintegration into society. And we were looking at a whole host of metrics as to say, okay, what are the driving factors to support their ability to actually connect into, connect back in a community and feel as if they were able to function. And a lot of the hypotheses were focused on the physical, mobility issues. And what was interesting was that when I ran the analyses, and I didn't make the study, but I analyzed it, the thing that came out was actually the driving factor was PTSD. And after I sat and thought about it, we published this, that was actually the single factor that was driving. And I sat and thought about it, and I was like, yeah, so the isolation that comes with that, the symptoms that are associated with that are going to impact our veterans and prevent their ability to connect, because a lot of our veterans have tremendous physical limitations. They may be missing limbs, and what was interesting is that doesn't necessarily mean they can't feel connected and be a part of the community. And so for me, I have a mental health interest. I have a mental health background, training, and so I found that really interesting. And that study, I got invited to participate in what was called the VA Brain Trust. So this was a public-private partnership event put on by the Secretary. And we had the NFL there, along with IBM and a number of other companies and agencies, all looking at CTE. So you guys may be familiar with kind of this research. Yeah, and look at the impact it's had on the NFL, right? And so for me, kind of a light bulb went off at that, because it was a 2-day event, and I saw the power of what's happening right here with the ACT-IAC efforts, is that, it was the most thrilling 2 days of just kind of collaborative cross-communication, because I've been in research for a long time, graduate school for a long time, and so for me it was kind of like light bulb went off, and I said, oh wow, we have such an opportunity here to kind of work horizontally and connect everybody, connect the dots, where our individual skills and expertise can actually be utilized and value add in a way that wouldn't happen otherwise. And that this needs to happen just across the board. Like, this is the mindset that everyone's talking about. We need to think like, oh, you know, we have a lot of resources, a lot of bright minds. It's really just a matter, of connecting everything, because, you know, the problems that we have, there are solutions. We just have to work together to find them. And that requires a lot of important principles and things that we've discussed. But so for my 2 projects that I'll discuss that I did complete, I worked to say, okay, in my position, in my role at the Medical Center, I want to try to do that brain trust focus, but for suicide prevention. So we did a Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention Innovation. So we brought in, and we had a really great ideation 2-day thing. We were able to kind of come up with ideas and policy recommendations. And I also helped it became clear that providing information, putting data out there was critically important on the suicide prevention space. And in order to do that safely and effectively, I had to learn and work with folks on how to make synthetic data and put information out there that people could use without violating any health information restrictions. And so that was a very exciting process, and we had buy-in from government agencies and speakers, and from Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And for me, it was very kind of my start on this process and this journey. That led me to be able to go participate with the Department of Commerce on the Opportunity Project, because the success of that event, people liked it. There was a thing called the Opportunity Project, which was a technology sprint. So you have industry, academia, and government agencies working in a short period of time together to develop a product for citizens that they can use and access. And we were able to build a pilot program that was tested at 5 of our medical centers in the VA that had a Lyft, the ride-sharing company, provide rides to homeless veterans to help them get access to medical appointments. Right? So it was kind of a perfect example. I worked with our homelessness office, who do great work, and we kind of talked about, well, what are the pain points? We're saying, okay, we have these vouchers, we have housing vouchers for homeless veterans, and so they just have to come, they just have to get on a bus and go here, and you just get $2 and go get your voucher and do the process, and the homeless veteran's like, okay, yeah, but I don't have $2, right? And so this is one of these things where, the partnership, say, okay, for this pilot, let's give them the transportation they need. Let's figure out these pieces and plug it all together. What is their journey like? And how do we get those pain points and work together to come up with creative solutions? And so I think those were kind of 2 projects that were successful because they were collaborative. We brought in a lot of different people, different perspectives, and a lot of resources, actually. And what's interesting was that, it's kind of, the thing that's been striking to me is how there are a lot of easy wins. There are things that are just easy for people to do, the path of least resistance. There are actually things that are available, like Lyft donated the money. They were like, the rides. They're like, here's the funds for this program, for this pilot. We can, support this. And that was easy for them. Whereas for us, it would be much harder to try to kind of go through different channels. So I think playing to everyone's strengths, and then also seeing that we all want to have a part where we help. Everyone wants to give a common. Everyone has most people want to help and contribute in some way. And so my observations with everything with the customer experience space and with the technology space is that all of the technology is actually going to be solvable. Like even though there are technical issues that are difficult, the actual challenging thing is the people problem. The people problem is the issue. And so things that I've found critical, that I've tried to approach for myself, is to say, kind of a humility. I try to approach things and say, okay, how can I change? I'm going to acknowledge that I don't have it figured out. I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I know I can contribute something and I care. And so if I get feedback or I think something's needing to change myself, I'm gonna do that. And I try to work with people that think similarly, and we have a lot more success that way. And I think that having that mindset is so critically important for kind of getting to the space where we all want to be. So you think about what do you want to envision to look like, and then work backwards. And you start with where you are, and then in the middle you figure it out somehow, hopefully with the right attitude. I think one of the questions people are talking about, like, what's success, right? And how do you measure success? Actually, was the question. And like I try to apply kind of a personal approach to that. So for me, my question is like, how is my son doing, right? I value that. I say, I'm successful if he's doing well. If I'm doing what I can to make it opportunities for him to do well. And I think what's interesting is that applies for veterans, actually. The VA is saying, how is the VA doing? How are our veterans doing, right? And I think even deeper beyond that, the question is, how are the veterans themselves asked, how are my children doing? Can I recommend that my children become veterans? They could become service members, right? And so that actually, when you for me, the thing that I get excited about is that when you step back and look at that whole picture, you see, for me, a real inspiration for why we're working together and the solutions we can come up together, because it's meaningful for everybody.
So, wow, I'm hearing a lot of words that are not typically words we talk about in the government management circles. Like passion and emotion, relationships, trust, feeling connected. And so, it's no surprise that it's taking government this long to start having this conversation. But are we, how realistic is it that we are able to do customer experience the same way that the rest of industry does, especially in a highly regulated industry such as healthcare? Will, you pointed out that the regulatory effort, to just the data sharing, the barriers, all the things we face. I mean, are we Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill here, or do we have any reason, glimmers of hope to think that this is actually something that we can really make happen within the government?
So, yeah, good question. I think it goes back to what Lynn was saying, and one of the approaches that we always try to start with is the why. And so why do we think customer experience matters? And I think everybody here would understand that notionally, but I think in each individual instance, you have to first think, why does our customer experience matter, and who is our customer? And so, I'd say especially in government, we all have multiple customers. I'd say we have primary, secondary, tertiary, and so on. And so when you think about that, from a policy standpoint, it exists when you're making policy, as well as, for instance, the Medicare program, and you talk about customer experience and having that aligned with what happens in the private sector. I think it's very real that you can have that, but I think you have to do it in a way that's focused on what your mission is and what your purpose is. So when I think of, like I said, CMS has multiple customers, and it actually has customers from the beneficiaries themselves. It has customers in commercial plans who provide products within CMS methods. And so I think that's one of the things, and I think we can achieve the same type of customer experience. I mean, we're talking about incorporating very similar things. I mean, things similar to net promoter scores, to just get the feedback loop that you need to constantly have that exists in the private sector. And those are things I think we can absolutely do. So I think there's definitely similarities that we'll always adopt, but in best practices that'll work across government and private sector. But I still think you always need to refocus on why are you doing what you're doing, because that will tweak the customer experience a little bit. And that's, I think, what you want. You want to be focused on your customer and the actual experience. In a lot of ways, not be incredibly focused on what your competition or peers might be doing, but really focusing on what's best for your customer. And that requires similar practices, constant feedback loops, right? Always staying close to your customer, being reoriented to your mission consistently. So I absolutely think there's a lot of similarities that we can achieve and will achieve. But in front of mind always has to be, why are we doing what we're doing? To make sure that we're actually focusing on our customer and not what our neighbor's doing. Because they're likely serving a different customer in a different lens.
Lynn, David, any thoughts?
No, I mean,
Glimmers of hope?
No, I mean, I would totally agree with that. It goes back to my point again about sort of what's the purpose of the organization, because I think, I mean, the thing that's kind of unique, I think, for government is that, everybody thinks business is sort of like, everybody says customer service is important in every business, right? And when we talk about trust, a lot of people were saying, well, there's just no trust in government. There's no trust in business either. I mean, let's be real, a lot of customers don't trust businesses because they are for-profit. And so that's a barrier that we have to overcome in the for-profit world. And I think, when we can talk about sort of the purpose of the organization, then people aren't so focused on thinking about sort of, not that profit isn't important and making money isn't important in business, but again, that's not why people get up every day. That's not why people come to work. That's not why people are engaged. And in an organization, you want employees that are engaged because engaged employees put forth extra effort. And people don't put forth extra effort when they don't feel any sense of connection to the organization, when they don't feel any sense of purpose and sort of, why am I here every day? And I think, you brought up a really good point, Will, about, I think when an organization can tell people why you're there, then I think it makes it a lot easier to start having a customer experience conversation, because you can understand sort of, okay, my role is contributing to this particular purpose, this particular mission. And one of the things we even say in our company, I mentioned before where people were thinking, well, I don't work in customer service, so almost like this mindset like customer service doesn't have anything to do with me. And I think, we gotta get people sort of out of that mindset and thinking like, I have a role to play in this. And one of the things I always say is if you don't directly serve the customer, you're serving somebody in the company that does serve the customer. So ultimately, we all serve the customer. So whether you're like processing an invoice or someone in my marketing team or someone on the product team or wherever, or IT, I think there's a lot of areas within a company where people can start to feel very siloed and very disconnected from that. And so I think having that purpose, being able to say, I either serve a customer directly or someone that does serve a customer directly, and you tie that to why you're there, then I think you got a better chance at talking about customer experience.
And I would add, I mean, I'm very excited to see kind of what I think would be a pretty quick shift in even just how people are talking. I can say at HHS, for instance, a year and a half ago when I came in, if you asked what's the customer journey, people would say, what do you mean? And now you have people saying, well, we're working on it, or we are focusing on our customer as opposed to somebody on the outside. And I mean, I think the culture is changing in a rapid way to reorient to this desire. So I mean, I'd say, not just at HHS, but other places across government, even at state governments, you see this being a constant element of mission. So I think it's very exciting and very optimistic. And in the way people have moved to incorporate this into kind of how they do what they do.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the thrilling part of it is that there's the time that we're in. There is a shift, there's a change, and there's opportunities for kind of framing the way we work together and we think about these things. So, the relationship between government agencies and business and that trust, there are absolutely overlapping priorities that are based on the same values and the same desires. And the citizens that receive the services that are provided can trust them. That can happen. We can work out kind of how that works, and that comes through policy and collaboration and projects and trying to figure things out. We say, okay, they have, like, so industries, driven by profits, of course, but they also have, companies care about the people that they provide services to, just how government agencies do. And so it's a different type of mindset, but the outcome is the same, and the virtue or the values that drive them are the same. And so I think what's so exciting is to kind of have these conversations where we're saying, how do we get to that place that we all want to get to? and you know, how do we work to figure that out? What does that look like? You know, what do we need to do?
If I can just add something, because a lot of people were talking about the customer journey, and I think that's another important part. And I think that's one of the things that for our company has been sort of a focus as well, because I think it ties back to the idea of like customer service versus experience, because it is a journey, and I think oftentimes in organizations, whether it's, you know, private industry or government, is people are sort of focused on their one little piece. It's very siloed, and when you can take a step back and look at a whole journey, and I think, you know, it's not an easy task to map the customer journey, because to your point, there's many customers. Same thing in the, you know, in our business, we have a lot of different stakeholders that we serve. But I think when you can start to document and articulate that journey, it makes it a lot easier for people to figure out where they are in that journey. Because oftentimes I think people are just at work sort of doing their job, and they're, you know, they're doing a good job and they want to do a good job, but often no one's actually even told them how their job relates to the whole experience. And I think if you can show people that, then again, you're driving that connection. Now I know, yeah, I might just process invoices, but this is extremely important because it helps do this, this, and this further down the road. It also, I think, ties into this idea of sort of process and making sure the process is better. You can't improve the process if you don't know the process right now. And I think, you know, related to that is sort of the customer journey mapping, but it's not just about process, it's about looking at the journey from the customer's standpoint and what are their experiences throughout, what are the pain points, what are the moments of truth. So I think those are all like sort of key tools or things that can help in the customer experience. I mean, I know it's not easy because when you start talking about large companies or large organizations or agencies, you know, the experience could be really far-reaching and have a lot of people in it, but I think that's another important reason why it needs to be done, because people need to know where they are in that journey and how they can impact it.
Well, so I agree, and I think a lot of what you've said, I've heard from you today, Lynn, is, you know, it's important to energize everyone in an organization, and to me that feels like the huge leap that we have to make, especially in government. I had an experience at the DMV a couple weeks ago where I felt less like a customer.
DMV is like the cable company of private industry, right?
It is government. It is the most clearly customer-facing part of government, and of course, we're not talking about federal government here, but I felt less like a customer, more like a suspect in a murder case. And so it just goes to show you that we do talk a lot, and there are glimmers of hope, but and it's no surprise that I've got a panel of leaders in your agency, and maybe I should also have someone who's behind the counter at the DMV on this panel as well, because I think it's important to note that, you know, we all talk a good game and we think, you know, we all understand the importance of customer experience, but how do we make that happen, or where we've been successful in making that happen culturally within our organization, either writ large or in pockets? Like, what can we do to drive this into the culture of our agency?
Can't figure this thing out. One of the things, and Lynn touched upon it, I think that we've done, and it's always a challenge, is you have to connect it back to mission. People want to be fulfilled and do good work, and I think so you have to figure out a way to cascade every little thing back up to the ultimate mission. So HHS's mission is to promote the health and well-being of the American people. Real easy and clear, right? And so, but when you get down to the person who is doing budget analysis for a proposal related to the purchase of a phone system, you know, and what they're ultimately dealing with is they're dealing with their peers in the agencies to provide a service that's critical to them. They're dealing with the Office of Management budget, dealing about whether or not the analysis and the expenditures are right. So they're in a fairly combative isn't the right word, but some of you might understand that environment to where they've got a lot of people who are interested, people are frustrated with them, and it's totally reasonable to say, how is this promoting or enhancing the health and well-being of the American people? And so I think it's incredibly easy to get disconnected from the larger mission. We've done it with our customer service framework that we're working to develop. Like I said, it goes back to trying to developing a framework that cascades from top to bottom, so that as you see the person who's doing the budget on the IT contract, they have a clear line of sight to, well, this is actually one of the most critical communication tools across the department. Without this, these people can't communicate to one another. They can't communicate to their beneficiaries. And by the way, this is, you know, X $million contract where if we save X savings, here's what it's going to be repurposed to the mission that goes directly to individuals. And so that's one of the ways that I think we've tried, and it's a very challenging task, but it's one of the ways I think if you keep people being reoriented to the why, I think it keeps them an engaged employee serves their customers very well, which means the customer's satisfied, which means which means the employee is more satisfied and happier. And so I think that's something that we, as in the leadership role, are constantly in the development of our customer experience, customer service initiatives, making sure that that is kind of one of the first things to where you see that cascading development of tasks and how it ultimately helps move the ball.
I'll just add, sort of going back to the idea of culture. I mean, if we just take a step back and think about what it takes to create a culture, change a culture, reinforce a culture, I mean, there's a lot of elements. Language is a big part of it. You know, how you talk about things in a company. I mean, the communication that happens in a company, you're talking about cascading information up and down. That's really, really critical because every organization, that's a big challenge. It's just, you know, there's information here, there's information here. What's the information flow sort of back and forth? And how is the language of the organization reinforcing that? Metrics and how people are measured. I mean, ultimately, people do what they're measured against. And I think when you want to start talking about like the culture of an organization, you have to look at you have to have the framework, but there's so many little things like that, you know, as we look at our journey at our company, we've had to look at all those things. You know, it's sort of like, it's one thing to put something on paper, but I think about things like our company town halls, the emails that go out, the things that we talk about. Are they reinforcing the framework? Are they reinforcing what we want? We talk about how we measure people. We talk about how we hire people. I mean, you really, like when you start talking about customer experience, you realize you're talking about everything. And it's not just one thing, and that's exciting, but that's also challenging. But, you know, it's really important to look at all those things because it's one thing to say something, but people pick up on when what you say is very different than what you do. And that's where I think it's really important to look at all the things you're doing to see, do they reinforce that? How are people recognized and rewarded? You know, what are the behaviors that are accepted and not? I mean, one of the things that sometimes makes me a little bit crazy is, you know, we have our company purpose, and then for me, a big part of it is the decision making. When we make decisions as a company, are they in line with that? Like when we say we want to make some kind of change, the first question we should ask ourselves is, what's the impact on the customer? Does this serve our purpose? But those are not easy things to do because people are just used to sort of doing their job, making their decision, and it seems like the right decision, but that's where the framework makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, and so another thought to this is kind of opportunities for, because we're talking about kind of cultural shifts and how do you adopt that and make those changes. And I think events where there's kind of, or opportunities for kind of connection and social connection where there's kind of a flat atmosphere, where it's like, because we're all in a room right now, you know, we're all just people, right? We have different jobs and titles and all that, but, you know, let's just say if a tiger manifested in the room right now, everything would go out the window, including us, you know, all that wouldn't matter, right? And I think that's kind of the trap or the trick, is to kind of realize there's a commonality that we all share. And I think when you identify in that, as opposed to, you know, I'm this person, I do this function, and that is what I do, right? As opposed to like, you know, well, we're all Americans trying to make the world a better place and do what we can to help each other. Like that's the thing you can connect in, and if you have the social component, right, that social component where you can connect and talk with folks in that way, that really breaks down, I think, some of those things. So opportunities for that is a nice step to look forward.
So I'm hearing what we need to do is practice what we preach.
Yeah, definitely.
Be deliberate with our words. Okay, great. We got about 10 minutes, 7 minutes left. Take a couple questions. Right here, looking at the guy in the black t-shirt.
Sure. Thank you, Dominic. Clark Campbell with Sitecore. A question for Will and David. On some of the O&B initiatives such as the Circular A11 and the 21st Century Idea Act, is that having an impact on what you're trying to do in this space? Is it driving organization awareness? What is the overall maybe help or influence in the customer experience space?
OMB is influential in how we approach things and how we move. I mean, I think it helps with the top-down message. I mean, in the President's management agenda, they specifically talk about customer experience. And so I think that's one of the things, if you talk about practice and what you preach, that is helpful in the effort that we do to encourage this and ingrain this into our culture. And so in addition to that, across government, HHS, we work with VA, we work with HUD, we work with across government. We all have to understand to work better together how we serve our customers. So OMB is helpful in kind of reinforcing that top-down message, but also being the connection point of, hey, here's the framework that we've seen have been helpful, and here's kind of how you can apply resources. But so they've definitely been influential in how we've approached it, and so we look to our peers to see where there's been successes. I mean, we've talked to state governments, local governments who've had a lot of success in the customer experience. I can give an example. I was on the phone with the governor of Maryland's office. They've had a pretty successful customer experience focus, and we want to hear those lessons learned and try to incorporate them and share them. And that's something that is helpful across the government, to where OMB is supportive in that manner.
And the VA actually was very much involved with the development of that Section 280 of the A11. And we've absolutely kind of seen it as the what priority. Customer experience is the #1 priority at the VA. Suicide prevention is the #1 clinical priority. But outside of that, well, they actually are related. But the customer experience efforts that are going on at the VA are frankly tremendous. They're really, it's a real shift that is making significant impact. It is trickling down all the way down to the medical center, where there are standards and expectations being set, and kind of forging a path of what the VA needs to look like. And so, like I said at the beginning, we're heading in the right direction with those pieces. But the VEO office actually was a part of that development of that document.
Thanks, Dominic. Jonathan Bennett with Adobe Systems. I absolutely agree that, as the panelists talked about, we're living in a renaissance time for customer experience and a new focus on what digital experiences and integrated digital experiences mean for people we serve. In working with the USDA, I got a chance to see a secretary top-down who's all in on customer experience and the most efficient, effective organization. Now working for a global company, I get to talk with public service organizations, state, local, federal, and across the globe, and everyone is all in, and it's awesome. But one of the things I'm seeing is this leading indicator trend, and maybe it's not uncommon that the state, even the local level, are starting to be really doing some really cool, innovative things to push the needle forward on customer experience and better experiences. So I'm wondering, for Will, at HHS, even David at VA, if you're seeing at that local level, like we are at some of the counties and the cities who are their HHS organizations that are SNAP, TANF, child support, opioid addiction in this country, in the wake of now foster kids who need, how do we help recruit those kids? And we can use digital experiences. So how are you guys reaching out to the most local level in your organizations to kind of see what that leading indicators are? Where do we start? That's really.
So part of the way, I think a couple examples that we've done is you focus kind of once again, what the mission is. So opioids, for example, there's a couple ways we've been local, and as the government, you can do a lot of things, but one of the most effective, I think, is raising awareness and convening. So one of the ways I think that we took a local approach to opioids is about 1.5 years ago, we had a code-a-thon, and we pulled in people from across the country and brought data sets from states, local governments, and together, and provided access to this data to these very, very smart, talented people to say, here's a ton of data, figure out how we can attack this. So we kind of had a little bit of a venture capital challenge, and from Stanford, from MIT, Facebook, Google, we brought local communities together to provide this data that's usually not combined. We brought very talented people to assess it, and what came out of it was a couple things of ways that you could have solutions to the local level. And so I think, but one of the biggest examples that was just rolled out was there was a application developed to identify where your local drug take-back center was. And so across the country, so it's actually being incorporated into Google Maps and other map services to where you can look it up and see. And so that was kind of one of the ways where you pull together a very clear mission and vision. You get people to get really inspired to do things like break down data barriers, work with some of the largest organizations and get focused. But that's one of, I'd say, an example of how we've tried to take a local collaborative approach, because healthcare, we know, is incredibly local, to ingrain that, but that's kind of one of the target ways. And another is just within the programs themselves. So I mean, if you look at HRSA with the community health centers, they've got 5,000 across the country. Dr. Serena's there has been focused on pushing that as well. So I think the way we've approached it is really through the programs and mission, because if you just say everybody get customer experience, they get distracted off why it's important, as opposed to, I need this net promoter score and I need to ask these questions. And we feel we shouldn't be directing the questions. We should be saying, figure out what questions you need to ask and let us know what the answers are. And that's where I think you drive it at the program level, because then you're much closer to mission. Your mission is not to provide a good customer experience. Your mission is to provide community health care, or your mission is to combat opioids. Customer experience is an effective method for doing that.
Other panelists, just 1 or 2 more minutes.
Okay, so just for me directly, I'm working on some research to ask some of the questions of opioid pain within the system within the VA, and different efforts that are being done there. So I have, from a research perspective, that's my direct connection. But I actually attended at opioid hackathon